You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley Fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Coursey.
Welcome to Wild Things and Wild Places, and a very special episode today, as all episodes are special here on Wild Things and Wild Places. Finally getting past some of the inner workings of the organization in episodes 1 and 2, and can get down to some meat and potatoes of some work that we've invested in, time, financially, and a ton of sweat equity, the actual conservation of mule deer. And what does that look like? Where does that start? How is that done? And I could not think of a better guest to bring on for this episode to make that introduction, an effort that we have been very supportive of at all levels, and very blessed to have Dr. Kevin Monteith joining me this episode. And Kevin, thanks for taking this time.
Josh, thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad. We were talking off air before we started to record this, that is this going to have a script? There's a lot to talk about with the work that the Monteith Shop, what the Monteith Shop is. And I just really, in putting some thought to that over the last couple of days, knowing we had this time scheduled, thought that the best approach on this would just to be raw and just to talk. And primarily because I want folks to be able to have a better understanding and awareness of you, not just your work. You know, our relationship and our friendship has grown immensely over the last decade, and we work and visit on a daily basis as friends. I just thought being able to give just that, the rawness of you as who you are, not what you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Of course, it does predicate a little background of what you do. You have been known to say this, and I'm going to beat you to the punch. You're just a redneck scientist from South Dakota. That's your description of yourself, and I've heard on many occasions, and I think that speaks volumes. Certainly, you're a professor. You have a huge, huge, huge respect among agencies, not just in Wyoming, but across the West and the nation. You're a national award winner and recognized as a leading scientist in many areas of mule deer conservation and ecology. But when you say that in describing yourself, that you're just a redneck scientist from South Dakota, break that down for me.
You did beat me to it. You didn't even give me much of a chance to even get
I wasn't going
you
to.
did.
I knew it.
Yeah, I mean, small town redneck kid from South Dakota, and that's who I am at the core. And I think I'm, whether for good or bad, I'm unwilling to sort of let go of that side of who I am. And I think I never planned to end up where I am today. And I think in many ways I don't think I really fit within the realm that I do today. But I guess there were other higher powers and plans that were in place to bring me to where I am today at the same time. I grew up in, sort of very brief, fast story, quick history. I grew up in small town South Dakota, town of 500 people. My high school graduating class was 12 kids, and grew up in a poor family. Didn't travel much, didn't do much of anything, was working right away as a young kid to help contribute financially to making do, but grew up in the outdoors, hunting and fishing, and loved every second of it and had fallen in love with that. Hated school, which is an incredible irony given where I am today, which maybe that's a part of why I won't let go of. I am just a redneck kid. I mean, I still service my own vehicles. I change my own oil in my truck because I'm unwilling to pay somebody else to do it. I mean, silly things like that. But I guess I sort of accidentally ended up in college. I was a bit of a motorhead and was just going to go to tech school. And then found out that there was a school in South Dakota, because I sure as crap was never going to leave South Dakota, and a school where I could go do wildlife and, of course, be a game warden, because I didn't know there was anything more. And went to school, didn't perform real great academically initially just because I wasn't that sharp. My second semester in college, I amazingly pulled off all A's, just figuring things out, and was told by many of my just faculty in the wildlife department that jobs in the wildlife field are really hard to come by. And so to get those jobs, you got to do all these things. You got to gain experience. You got to have a solid reputation. You got to do well, decent academically, all the things. I took that to heart, took it seriously, took advantage of whatever opportunities that I could, and didn't know it at the time, but as I got involved with various things and began to be a part of research, I fell in love with collecting data, understanding what makes animals tick. And one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was going on to advanced degrees, doing more science, got a master's degree in South Dakota State as well, working on white-tailed deer, and then went on to a PhD working on mule deer in the Sierras of California, and then ended up here in Wyoming. And so I guess through that process, I fell in love with animals, wildlife, big game, even more, but fell in love with working to understand what makes them tick, why they do the things that they do, and how we influence them. And simultaneously fell in love with working with amazing people, working with students, and being a part of that process from the ground up all the way to the finish line. And so I never, probably until I accidentally fell into sort of the position I am and being able to do science as a faculty member at a academic institution, that was never a goal. That wasn't my plan. It just kind of, it came together, and that's where I ended up today. And so part of that and the environment that I end up working in, I'm still me. I'm still just a small town kid that's kind of like bringing a bit of that redneck mindset into the sciences, very hands-on, hands dirty, getting in there, working to figure things out and maybe unique and novel ways that are not always easy. And so maybe that's the side of it that not willing to let go of.
Do you think, Kevin, that has ultimately contributed to the success that you have because it is a little unorthodox compared to some of your peers?
It's a good question. I hope so. Maybe. I think we think and approach things a little bit differently because of that. And I hope at the same time, we're just one of many others who care. And the side of that is, we may be, my group, we're a group of scientists, but at the same time, I mean, I hope we're doing good things, but doesn't make us any better than anybody else who cares about these amazing animals and these amazing places. And the reality is our role is in contributing to science in those ways. We got to work with a whole suite of other people who have different roles as a part of that process, from the land managers to the game managers to those that are helping with access to fundraising entities that are making it possible, to permitting entities at the university, to those that are helping communicate the science, like all different facets of all those aspects, including your organization and each of your chapters that are contributing in those ways. The reality is we all play an incredible role. Ours is no more important than any others. We just hope to contribute to it in meaningful ways.
Yeah, let's talk specifically about the Monteith Shop. When people hear that, it may not register as like a lab like you would hear in most doctor-led operations, similar or counterparts of yours, colleagues. But you had some resentment towards the word lab and thus the Monteith Shop, more of a field work-based organization and effort, really kind of took hold from there. And where did that start and where is it at today?
Yeah, so I certainly catch a bit of flack for shop. What the heck is that? Why, you just trying to be different? Maybe, but at the same time, all I could think about with like a lab notion is, I don't know, a bunch of white trench coats playing in the lab. Indoors, Petri dishes. And that's not necessarily the truth behind it, but I don't know. I wanted, I guess, just the notion, like I just couldn't accept that and wanted to do something different. And so, of course, my sort of redneck mindset and upbringing, I mean, think about a mechanic shop. Like we're diagnostic mechanics. We're getting in there, we're getting hands dirty, we're figuring things out. What's not working correctly, working to diagnose that and ultimately help identify the problem and help fix it. And of course that's tied to, our big game populations. And so that was my mindset and thinking about it more of like a hands dirty, wrench turning mindset, hence where shop came from.
Right. Specific to the Monteith Shop, it is directly tied to the University of Wyoming through the Hobbs School. That could have been done at another university, but how did it develop with the University of Wyoming?
Yeah, so I originally came to University of Wyoming in 2013 as a postdoc. It was just postdoctoral research scientist. All it means is you've gotten your PhD, but you're not really in like a full-time faculty position yet. Did some work with Moose when I came here initially for that, and then a position in the Hobbs School opened up, and was able to garner that position. And then from that momentum behind just the work that we did and the growth within our group, and yeah, the entity was born, and through time have gained, I hope, a reasonable reputation and credibility associated with it. That's also ideally created some momentum behind the work that we do, and then momentum behind what we learn and how that can be used going forward.
So you lead a team of other scientists within the Monteith Shop under your direction, 15 other scientists at the Monteith Shop?
About 15 right now. Yep, that's correct.
And each of those scientists are all working on various problems. Of those 15, how many of them are associated directly with projects in Wyoming that are based on big game?
Oh, good question. So almost everybody is focused on Wyoming work. I have 3 that are working on sheep, deer, and mountain lions in the Sierras of California. And then all the rest of them are working here. And so some are leading projects. So as a grad student, that may be leading a project. Some are like our lab coordinator or research scientists that are working on an assortment of a diversity of projects, or are leading our outreach endeavors, communicating our science, or to a full-time technician, etc. So kind of a whole suite of different roles of people, everything from master's students, PhD students, postdocs, lab coordinator, research scientists, all the way through.
All right. In addition to juggling those responsibilities, though, you are also a professor at the University of Wyoming. You were, within the last couple of years, recognized as a Wyoming Excellence Chair. A lot of folks may not understand the inner workings of the academia world, but to be a vested and tenured employee of the University of Wyoming is far different than where you started in 2013 to where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're relative to our program, the growth within, or even just my position personally, it's been a rapid amount of change since I started in my formal position in 2015.
Yeah, significant difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
So one thing that makes you Wyoming unique, I think, and maybe has created opportunity, of course, as my Christian brother and the many friendly conversations we've had in faith, we both know who guides our direction and the things that the doors and opportunities that come before us in our lives. But, Wyoming, I would think, has a very unique opportunity and offering for an outfit like yours, in that our Wyoming Game and Fish Department does not necessarily have, although that is changing some, but its own research leg, if you will, which is a very important component as a wildlife managing agency, to be able to provide that information of science and how that provokes management changes. But that opportunity in Wyoming would maybe not be there in another state. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that element and the role that maybe researchers at an academic institution may play vary from state to state, depending upon those needs. And as you noted, that is certainly changing within the state of Wyoming. But at the same time, given the needs that were initially underway, when we were first coming online, the partnership that developed and grew within the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and then the associated questions that existed as well, that I think we were, just because of the type of the work that we do, we were fairly poised to work to be able to bring some information to light in partnership with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and other entities within the state of Wyoming, to work to address some of those questions, help aid in understanding populations, to what's affecting them, why they're not growing, and then potentially identify what that may mean for us going forward, whether or not there's anything we can do about it. Ideally identifying the things that maybe we can pull on, and then potentially make change thereafter.
Yeah, the educational background that you have specific to your PhD and the work that you have done with a significant interest and focus on nutrition, that has played very well for you to be able to come to Wyoming and bring that expertise and that leadership of that realm of understanding in the science community to really what is still to this very day something in need of a lot more answers, and hence a great opportunity for you to be in the place that you are at this exact time on the timeline. But I would say, and maybe you would correct me if you thought I was err in this, but the decline of mule deer populations over the last few decades certainly hasn't hurt your opportunity for needing you. Wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, maybe that's sort of a sad thing to say.
It is.
It is.
But at the same time, if that's the hand we've been dealt, and I think it's fair to say that mule deer populations, not just in Wyoming, but across the West, have declined significantly to a very awareness of not only those within the academia world, our wildlife management agencies, but also just the general populace of the public.
Yeah.
There is a growing concern about the decline of mule deer.
It is, and it's a legit concern. And I guess, one could say that for perhaps somebody like me creates job security. It seems like kind of an evil way to think about that. But the reality is, I think there's a need for it. And as we were coming on scene, there's, the mule deer, the decline in mule deer populations wasn't new as we were coming online during that period of time. That had been around for many years prior to that. And there had been a lot of work that had been done and some very good work that had been done to address some of those questions. The challenges in part were the answers are complex. I think we looked for a silver bullet for a really long time, but even silver bullets sometimes can be hard to uncover. And I guess the way we work to address some of those questions is, as you noted, is through the lens of nutrition. And the logic behind that is just simply, even within our personal daily lives, but certainly for any ungulate population, any deer population, the backbone of what creates the existence of that population is their food. If they can't meet their energy requirements through the year, through the season, and those that support and will sustain reproduction, nothing else matters. And so we can quibble about all sorts of other things, from hunting seasons to harvest pressure to predators to all the other sort of like external factors that may affect them. And at the end of the day, if they don't have the resources, the amount of net energy and food that they need to persist, then the rest doesn't matter. We can push and pull and tug on all those other things, and at the end of the day, it's not going to matter. And so our nutritional approach is to basically do as best we can to kind of do everything through that lens. Like, we lay that foundation from a nutritional perspective, understand what that means for the animals, and oftentimes that's through repeated capturing, handling of animals, assessing their body fat, which is basically their integrated measure of what they've experienced during that prior season. If the food was great and they got a lot of fat, or if the food was not so good, or they experienced tough conditions, or were invested a lot in reproduction, then they're not going to have that fat. And so that's been our gauge to assess those things. And it's the building block of a population. And so as we attempt to address all these other questions, unless we first acknowledge that, we potentially are just going to miss the boat, and we're not going to understand what's going on. Because the other side of that is where an animal stands nutritionally affects everything downstream, practically everything downstream that it does. And then what we see later, whether that be survival, growth, reproduction, all the things, is a function of that nutritional attribute. So unless we're working through that lens, it doesn't mean we can't address other meaningful questions, but truly, as we're working to understand what drives population growth, decline, stagnancy, those sorts of things over time, unless we're dealing with that foundation first, it's going to be tough to address things otherwise. And so that's been sort of the logic and kind of maybe like the pillar of our work is to address that foundation first to the best of our ability.
Yeah, well said, Kevin. I think that with that, it's very easy when you have that understanding to recognize if nutrition at that very basic level of existence implies everything that you've just indicated, which I believe that it does, it opens the door for looking at how that works at a landscape level. And over the last decade, we've seen it certainly just blow up. I mean, including our own governor with an executive order to protect migration corridors. But really, when you think about the movement and the transition from summer to winter range twice a year and those movements, it is all still ultimately being held to the benchmark of nutrition. That migration is because of nutrition.
100%. And I think the momentum behind protecting migration has been really critical. And I think there's moments where we can sort of get lost in the notion that, we need to protect these areas so the animals can get from here to there. And that's very true. That's that process. But the other side of that, as you noticed, that's completely driven by nutrition. And it's animals responding individually to what they know, to where they're going, to where their migratory routes and their summer range are. But I think if we forget that, if we lose that, what ends up happening is we didn't just lose a migration. We want to keep the migrations, right? But we didn't just lose a migration. The reality is we lost the food that the animals that were going to those places used, because those animals aren't going there anymore. So if the animals don't go there and use the food that's there, it's functionally not food that's being brought into the population, thus potentially supporting and growing more animals. That's why migration is so critical. That's why we have these large, robust populations of migratory animals, because they're moving and accessing this food across this vast landscape. So they're bringing food into the population that results in a big, robust population. And so we lose that, we inevitably end up with population decline, because we are functionally taking away food from the population because animals aren't going there and using it anymore.
There are a tremendous amount of projects going on in the state of Wyoming from the Monteith Shop. We have been invested into several of these projects from the onset. And we're going to have several episodes that will involve not only you, but also members of the Monteith Shop scientist team to talk about some of the specifics to these projects. But what are those projects? And I don't want you to go into the details of them, but just for folks to understand the magnitude of what the Monteith Shop has its hands in right now in the cowboy state that they're working on, specific to projects that would be associated with big game animals.
Yeah, so a number of sort of the active ongoing projects, some of which are still happening on the ground, some are wrapping up, or some we're still working through data analyses, drawing conclusions, those sorts of things. Probably one of the ones that's maybe there's a couple that are highly recognized. The longest term one that we've been working on is the Wyoming Range Mule Deer project. So, and out our back door right here, I've been working within this population since 2013. So we're roughly at 10 years right now, which that notion is pretty unheard of, to be able to work, do any sort of research project for that duration of time. And to do it in the way that we have, we're working to track individual animals through time. It's pretty remarkable. We're very blessed and fortunate to be able to do that. And we are learning not only a lot about the ecology of this mule deer population as a whole, but learning so much about just the ecology of mule deer, the intimacy to their environment and how they're tied to it.
As well as fidelity to their movement.
Fidelity to their movement, how they learn to go through those movement practices. And there's aspects that are kind of embedded within the Wyoming Range project that are tied to understanding what males do as they grow and develop and their patterns of survival. And then also the Rose Petal project, which is a part of the Wyoming Range project, which necessitates our ability to follow offspring alongside their mom all the way through to adulthood. And so basically three years from birth to surviving 3 years and following those offspring alongside mom to understand how they develop and establish their behaviors from migration to establishing their summer range.
And again, all of these, I want to be able to have more content-specific podcasts to break these down at a more intimate level. But I guess where I'm going with this, and I know you have more on the list that you would probably want to share, but what really comes to mind is that the activity of what the Monteith Shop and the investment and the many partners that make all of these projects come together, it's vast and it's enormous, but it's probably coming out of the winter that we have just experienced with, probably no other time of any of us alive at this time on the planet have ever had more public awareness, more public concern truly, I think that's representative of not only have mule deer been declining for years, but it has raised the level of concern to a whole new level in light of some of the, I don't know if you want to call them headlines, or just talks that have been floated around in various media and social media platforms. But when you hear something that indicates that there has been up to 90% loss of a herd, and it's significant, it's catastrophic.
It's changing a landscape. Changing a landscape by way in which the animals that are there and live on it and use it.
Yeah, so in light of coming out of this very harsh winter that Mother Nature really threw the most serious of significant uppercuts to this population of deer in the Wyoming range, what are your thoughts on its current state? What do you know and can share with others that have also that same concern, but maybe not be privy to some of the latest or the information that's been used in years past that's helping formulate new plans and new directions and new projects today for your work?
Yeah, so a few highlights or lowlights. I don't know.
Yeah, probably
low light. I know.
It's been tough.
Tough, yeah, and eye-opening to a level that's it's honestly hard to fathom and wrap your mind around the level of sort of, I mean, I guess it's destruction that winter brought in knowing what these animals went through. I mean, so we've had two bad winters within the past decade as we've been working to understand this population. One was in 1617, the other in 1819. The level of loss there, we lost most of our fawns going into those winters, and then roughly 30% of our adult females going into those winters, which it's legit. That's serious loss. I would have never fathomed seeing anything more. What's interesting is, so this winter, the level of loss far and away surpassed that. We lost 70% of our adult females, roughly 65% of our males, and then all of our fawns we lost through the course of the winter. One nearly made it all the way through. Made it all the way through the winter, and then we lost it this spring.
When I break that down, is it fair to say then, or is it accurate, that there are two age classes of our population that are no longer on the landscape, essentially?
Yeah, pretty much, because we lost the fawns from last year, and then we're going to have few going into this year. Is that what you're referencing in particular? Yeah, well, right now there's three age classes that are missing. The age class from 1617, 1819, and then the age class that would have been born in 22 are missing. So 16, 18, and 22 are age classes that are missing. And then the other thing, so what we see during these bad winters, just to fairly quickly anyway, I mean, we lose old animals. We lose those very young, and then we lose those old animals are the ones that are generally the first to go. And then it kind of continues to restrict down, and those that didn't start winter with enough fat reserves are the animals that we end up losing through the course of the winter. Now, the other sort of side of that I think is really important to consider is this winter was very bad. Interestingly, we had good moisture, generally good leader growth on sagebrush going into this past winter, meaning they were pretty well set up from a food perspective. They also came into this winter at 12% body fat, which if we contrast that to the winter of 1617, which from a snow condition perspective was nothing compared to the winter that we just had. But those animals, our adult females going into the 1617 winter, went into it at 8% body fat. So we were 4 percentage points fatter going into this winter than we were in 1617.
A little more fuel in the tank, huh?
A lot more fuel in the tank. And the reason that is because of the 1617 winter. After the 1617 winter, we had never seen the level of fatness in animals that we had seen prior to the 1617 winter than what we saw after. It was driven by, of course, the moisture that occurred. That year, a number of animals did not reproduce successfully, but at the same time, we also had fewer animals on the landscape, which led to the benefit of those that remain. And what we had seen leading up to 1617 is just kind of stagnant. Population wasn't growing, and we saw progressive decline in body condition every autumn within the population, strongly indicative of, given the current habitat conditions that we had, we were unable to grow more deer. We were pushing at our limit. And then that 1617 winter kind of knocked the feet out from under them a little bit, but then we saw the benefit on the other side. Now that we're on the backside of this winter, we rerun our models that when we're looking at survival over winter. And if we just started this winter, and this work was led by my PhD student, Taylor Lashar, and her work in looking at factors that influence survival of deer over winter, we would have maybe been at probably under 10% survival had we started winter at 8% body fat like we did in 16-17. So
if there is a silver lining to this, it could have been worse.
If there is a silver lining. Yeah, exactly.
But the deer now coming out of this winter, and thank goodness that's behind us, but well, you talk about a smorgasbord of groceries and a buffet line with nobody else in it.
It is green.
I mean, have you ever seen deer that could be going into this next winter at 14%, 15%?
I think it could be incredible going into this year. Yeah, I think we could probably exceed 15% pretty easily going into this winter.
Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, so I have to go look. I don't know what it was off the top of my head, but what I do know is after the 16-17 winter, we develop our figures where we show the fluctuation in body fat. We had to lengthen the axes on our figures because we couldn't fit the new data point from how fat those animals were that fall. And I anticipate it to be similar again this year. They will be, I don't know how they couldn't be, but they ought to be incredibly fat going into this winter.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there within that just in itself.
There is, yeah.
As we move forward, I think everybody, has some sort of, not frustration, not irritation. I don't know what the right adjective it is, but there is this maybe growing level of impatience of, well, how do we turn this around? And you mentioned earlier there does not seem to be that proverbial silver bullet to just fix this. This is going to take patience.
Absolutely,
and that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, and I think it's not satisfying. And I think that's.
I mean, we live in a day and age where everything is instantaneous.
Yeah.
I mean, look how fast things are. I mean, nobody is taking their 35 millimeter film to Walgreens and waiting 3 days to come back.
No, we have it instantly.
We live in a day and age where we want immediate results now.
That's right. And this
is not that.
No, and we can't gain those immediate results.
Right.
The reality is too, like, this is catastrophic. It hurts. It's frustrating. It's disappointing. It's disheartening. I mean, even as we've seen this winter, even from like a research perspective with the things that we're trying to learn and follow family groups through time, we had family groups that were wiped out during this winter, complete, which means like the data loss that existed within that is immense for us too. And not to be like a snotty scientist, but all that work, these animals are so cool, what we were learning from them. And then just like that, it's wiped. But it's also... Will that
lead to, particularly with the fidelity that mule deer have for their migration, their summer range, their winter range, will that lead to vacant landscapes?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that ties to what will probably be a lengthy conversation in another segment, but ties to these ideas associated with the rose petal hypothesis and what we've learned about mule deer and are continuing to learn about them. And as you noted, they're an incredibly faithful animal. Their level of intimacy and how they're tied to their environment is amazing.
They're not just going to see that hill over there and think, no, looks like there might be some good grub over there. No, it just don't work like that.
Their home is their home. Yeah.
Elk all day long.
All day long. Elk are so versatile. Plastic, they just do whatever. Will roam pretty much wherever. And mule deer, they're just tied to their world. Once their summer, winter range and migratory route is established, they are incredibly faithful to that. And so what that means is that it's their faithfulness and the places that they know and live on their landscape that drives where they go, meaning it's memory that takes them there. And so during these like catastrophic level of losses, if we've wiped memory out from the herd of access to particular places on the landscape, means there's not going to be deer there anymore. Yeah. That conversation go a whole number of different ways, just as, in talking with many passionate either hunters, locals, ranchers, other folks who are interested in mule deer that, will say that, man, I used to have mule deer all over this ridge line or, this meadow, and there's no mule deer here anymore.
Yeah.
Where did they go? And how do we get them back? And all those, what contributed to that and what it means going forward are all wrapped within this idea of how home is found for mule deer essentially, and how it's maintained.
Yeah, we got a lot we need to unpack here, Kevin. And I know, and we knew going into this that there would be multiple episodes that we would want to be able to sit down and have these conversations with you about. But before we close, and I know we're already a little bit over time, but I don't think folks are going to mind, because the content and the worthiness and the timeliness of the discussion that we're having. There are 2 points that I do want to bring up before we close this episode. In reference to vacant landscapes and places, and you've just touched on it, historically, people that can, through citizen science or their own observation, be able to account for this landscape used to host deer, and that has been replaced by elk. I have heard that time and time again, as you have heard it as well. That could be a result of it not being programmed to be able to be used and gone and sought on an annual basis multiple times.
So if it first needs to start with what changed that led to the loss of the animals that were going there. And once that's happened,
Katie barred the door.
There's nobody going there anymore.
Yeah.
That's right.
Elk find it. Elk take ownership. And
yep, that's exactly right.
All right. The other point I want to bring up is, and I want to close with this, because in the 12 years of being in this arena with the Muley Fanatic Foundation, and 5 years prior to that, the amount of sportsmen and sportswomen, agency folks, federal agencies, state agencies, decision makers across the board, I have never been privy to more concerned conversations about hunting, and if even we should be hunting. That is very alarming. And this is all spurred from this bad winter, and the awareness of what the resource was experiencing and taking it on the chin. I mean, mortalities of carcass carnage were prolific at every level of every platform. And so to raise the concern, or should we be taking, was a very deep and sincere rooted concern by many. Mm-hmm. I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't even know why. But at some point, the ability to address where the role of hunting is on the overall population of herd sustainability has got to be something that we can have a frank conversation about, recognizing, and there were some changes this year, the most conservative hunting opportunities ever for the state of Wyoming, the removal of doe and fawn licenses, but the removal of bucks, which is predominantly the primary interest of those that take to the field every fall to hunt. That effect, as we try to recover from this blow that we have been dealt, where do you see that, and what is that impact? And is it something that it is okay that it's continuing to persist? And how do you explain that?
A great question that speaks to sort of a philosophical mindset, right? And should we or should we not? Which I don't necessarily need to debate. And what you asked me is, biologically, what does it mean relative to harvesting males, correct?
Correct. I mean, at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, yep. And so I think I will say very briefly that I agree it has been the outpouring of concern in that regard, and amongst those that are participating in that process it's pretty amazing, and maybe
it's historic in my eyes.
And unanticipated, I think. And
what's interesting is the momentum it grew with. I mean, we started to hear about this in March,
and then it just went.
It continued, and it just grew, and grew, and then by the end of April,
which
alive.
I think what's amazing about that is it speaks to the level of care that hunters place on this resource, and that they're willing to forego the opportunity to engage in that process to be able to help aid in its recovery and conservation over the long term. And, hunters will do their best to profess that they're conservationists, that sort of thing, but get a bad rap a lot of times too, with regards to whatever, you just want that. So you can go and kill stuff. That's all you care about.
I had a lady at the airport one time who seen I had a Muley Fanatic Foundation sweatshirt and inquired about what that was. And I told her a conservation group, and then she asked, just started to connect the dots on her own and said, so you're let me see if I get this right. You're saving them so you can kill them.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, there is that simple mindset out there that is
absolutely.
It's hard to be able to change that.
And I mean, the reality is hunting is really critical to conservation, given the connection and appreciation that those people that engage in that process have with wild things and wild places. The economic return relative to the funding for our state agencies, what license revenues generate, like we can go on and on about the contributions of it within that way. But
on the backs of sportsmen and sportswomen.
Yeah, absolutely. But the notion that no, we'll forego that. Like, it's more important that we see this recovery as opposed to just like, let me partake in this process. It's a powerful message. The other side of that, biologically, in what is still happening relative to the opportunity to harvest males, for example, within this population that we've been talking about, biologically, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we do not need polygynous species. It takes only, we could get down to a buck-doe ratio of like 7 males per 100 female deer.
And they would all still get...
Yeah, we'd be fine. Pregnancy rates would be maintained. It's maybe pathetic. But that's the only role the males play within the population, right? Yeah. And so what it's going to take for return of the population is the females. The males are going to play a negligible role, and we don't need that many of them. So what that means biologically, as this population recovers, it's the females and having enough males to maintain pregnancy and fetal rates within those females, which isn't going to take many. So relative to participating, engaging in a hunting season still on that level, it's not going to matter. What it will affect to some degree, certainly, is what that looks like relative to harvest pressure on males, perhaps age structure on males, those sorts of things. And so it has a potential to affect things to some degree in that way, just like any sort of hunting season would in that regard. But relative to recovery of the population, it's going to take the females and their ability to produce and rear offspring, and males play a negligible role in that.
And please be kind to us, Mother Nature.
Please. We need it. Need it.
Have you ever given any thought to how much wildlife management really ultimately, at the end of the day, is at the mercy of what Mother Nature is going to do?
So much of it. There's so many things that are outside of our control. We are a controlling society, right? We want to have control over these sorts of things. We want to be able to push buttons. And
when you think of management as hope and pray.
Yeah. Well, I know, and proportionally, like the breakdown of all that, which I guess we've never done that. We could probably look at that scientifically to some degree, like what proportion of what we see is driven by external factors, and we see it in everything we do.
Sure.
Right, relative to winter conditions, to spring and summer moisture, to drought, to plant succession, some of which we can control. Those sorts of things. So much of it's driven by Mother Nature. We do our best to. But the other side of that, though, too, is we can do things within populations, within habitats. So whether that's habitat management, whether that's population management by regulating populations at moderate density and not letting them get too big, to whether that's considering different species and managing them accordingly, we can work to try to manage a population to buffer them against some of the vagaries of Mother Nature and what Mother Nature brings. And to me, I think that's one of the valuable parts that we potentially play in management within these wild systems like that.
Last question, and we'll close on this. I'm going to let you have the last word. Well, I'll come back and close it. So we know it's closed, but king for a day. Dr. Deer is king for a day in light of what we have just experienced, very recent history of the impacts and the hardships that this winter has impacted our deer populations in western Wyoming. Dr. Deer is king for a day. What would you do? What would you do differently? What would you do to provide that optimism or silver lining, knowing that, these external factors of implication, this is what we've been dealt, but we have to move forward?
It's kind of half a loaded question. I really like it. It's kind of loaded too.
Well,
that's what you do.
Just unpack it.
The level of, so what's happened is it's a landscape level change relative to this deer population and what we're going to see on the landscape. And I think if part of what we do, even if I was king for a day, is going to be driven and motivated by what we want to see going into the future, right? If we want to see this deer population back to 30,000+ animals, that sort of thing. Assuming, if that's the case, one is going to be, we need so much messaging and communication and understanding of where we're at today and how we got here and what it should mean for us going forward to help put, just like you and I are today, put everybody on the same table with armed with the same information so we can make sound decisions going forward. That demands that we have that information. And I think we're very fortunate and sort of poised, given our collaborative work within this system and other systems, to be able to understand some of those pieces, to know where some of the multiple cuts are happening for mule deer right now and how we can work to alleviate some of those things. Habitat management is always a thing. It's always going to start at that fundamental baseline of considering that and what that means for the population, which ideally means understanding that having the maximum number of deer on the range isn't always the best thing. Having a moderate and healthy number of deer on the range is a good thing. And I realize we certainly want to grow now in working towards enabling some of those things, the other pieces that we've seen now, given the thwack on the system and the deer population, certainly we anticipate our predator-prey dynamics to be shifting a bit, which means some of our predator populations, though have played a minimal role previously, at least in this system, that's probably about to change, and I think we're seeing some of that bear out. We're likely to see higher rates of predation than we've seen previously because our predator populations are still robust. And then the other side of that is elk populations too, and what we've seen and what we're learning in another system, in a high desert system with the Deer Elk Ecology Research Project, and that elk can certainly play a role in how deer occupy and use the landscape and how it affects them nutritionally. It's a different system, but it's liable to play somewhat of a role here too. And so basically looking and identifying all those pieces that we've, and then working to protect space in this landscape and freedom of movement for these animals is going to be critical. And we're already kind of targeting that, and then working to continue to wrap that up and protect their seasonal ranges and what that looks like for them going forward from a food perspective. And then lastly, sort of the wild card that I don't quite know yet is this notion of this level of loss within this deer population and this topic of vacant space that we've been talking about for a number of years now through the lens of the Rose Petal Project and what that could potentially mean. It's hard for me to fathom that level of loss hasn't created vacant space. We've certainly seen it in our collared animals. We don't collar every animal within the population, but it's hard to imagine that vacant space isn't going to exist. And so if we have places that animals are no longer using, in particular on summer range, it could be a loss in carrying capacity to this deer population even after it recovers. So for example, if there's vacant space on the landscape, this population could grow and hit 15,000 animals and be at capacity of their current habitat. Not because they don't have more habitat to use, but because of that fidelity and they're not using it. And so this notion, like potential for out-of-the-box thinking of how do we get animals to occupy that vacant space. And we're learning, when we do talk about the Rose Petal Project, we're learning what that looks like for young animals and which ones remain faithful to their natal range, which ones don't, that sort of thing. But are there out-of-the-box ways in which we can sort of help to expedite the reoccupancy of what has otherwise become potential for vacant space? And so some of that will take maybe some time and understanding what that looks like, and we're going to see a lot of that this year. And then just acknowledging the various triggers and what seems acceptable for others that we may be able to push or pull on to help recovery of this deer population.
All right, let me just break this down from a redneck interpretation.
I wasn't redneck in that?
Well, I mean, you were.
Okay.
But I think it would be safe to say, if you were to summarize that in very layman terms, an increased effort on predators, an increased effort on the culling and harvesting and killing of elk, and being willing to think outside the box and try even translocating, moving some deer from one area in a landscape to areas where deer no longer are, and learn from that.
Maybe.
King for a day.
King for a day. King for a day.
Whack some coyotes, some mountain lions, some bears, kill a bunch of elk, move some deer around and see if it works.
Yeah, and that's all with the lens if the notion is to facilitate aid recovery as much as and as quickly as possible. And ideally, whatever that is, learn from it through the course of that. Don't just go and no, because we do so much of those sorts of things in other places, and we know it's not effective.
Spaghetti on a wall and see what sticks.
It's not effective.
It's bad.
And then the one thing you did miss in that is just continuing to acknowledge the role of food, of space on the landscape, and securing it and protecting it for these populations too. Like that, we can't lose that. We have so much momentum behind that already, but we can't lose that.
Yeah.
And that's that part of that vacant space of helping them regain it, but also securing it and protecting it for them into the future.
Kevin, it's been a pleasure. Again, we have several episodes. Our relationship and our connection with the Monteith Shop, with you personally, even prior to the establishment of the Monteith Shop, has been there from day one for us as an organization. You were viewed and respected in many fields, not just in the state of Wyoming, but in the science community. You're held in the highest regard. It's a great honor for you to not only be able to sit down and break this down with me, but looking forward and being able to talk about so many of the other things that you have going on with the shop and the great team that you lead. I know you were never one to take the credit. You've always been very vocal in dishing that out and making that be known that you have a great team that works with you. I wish you and your team the very best as you move forward and you navigate this storm, and that's what it is. And I think you're prepared to weather it. You have the team and you lead a team to be able to be resilient in these efforts. And with that, my hat's off to you. And I just continue to pray for you and the team and the efforts that you have moving forward. Know that, we're all really just concerned and we're all trying to play our part, as you said so eloquently at the beginning. We all have a valuable role in this. So thank you for that. And I appreciate you being on Wild Things and Wild Places, my friend.
Thanks for the time and conversation. I appreciate it.
All right. Until next time, if you like what you hear, please subscribe. Stay tuned. You'll be notified of a new episode every Tuesday. Stay tuned now for Campfire Chat, part of Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation production.
Gathered around the campfire's flickering glow, stories ignited, bridging hearts and minds as the world outside faded and connection reigned supreme. Welcome to Campfire Chats.
And welcome to Campfire Chat. And joining me today, the most special of guests for me, and I'm excited to be able to have this conversation. I have my 22-year-old daughter, my youngest daughter, Mykenna Morgan Jane Coursey-Jewell. And by the way, thank you for hyphenating the last name when you got married last August.
Of course. Wouldn't want it any other way.
Yeah. So I've always just referred to Mykenna as MJ. Her two middle names, Morgan Jane. MJ, I am glad to have you on Campfire Chat.
Well, I am so glad to be here.
Yeah, Mykenna lives in Utah and is up visiting for the weekend. And I said, hey, I'd like to sure get this episode of Campfire Chat done with you while you're here. And she, much obliged, has accommodated this. And so Campfire Chat, it's all about hunting. How cool is that? Just get to talk about hunting.
Yes, best topic ever.
Yeah, so let's talk about hunting specific to you. What's your earliest hunting memory?
Earliest hunting memory. That's so funny. We were just talking about this earlier today. There is a picture on your TV stand of me and my sister sitting on top of one of your deer. And yeah, I think that's the first experience that I remember. We were both arguing about who could hold the antlers in the picture, of course, because that's the glory spot. But yeah, I think that has to be the first memory.
Yeah.
You coming home, backing up with the deer in the back, you unloaded it, and of course you wanted to take the picture with us on it, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's that's been a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was young in that picture.
3 maybe?
Yeah. 3, 4.
I remember, which I understand not having the ability to, remember when you were, you would have been 9 months old, but I have a picture somewhere of you in this little bright orange, because it wasn't actually a hunting piece of clothing gear, but a little bright orange sweatshirt that said Gap on the front of it. And you would have been 9 months, because I would have been in September of 2001, and you were born in January. So you would have, but you were walking. So you
about running.
So it might have been October, actually, because I think you started walking on my birthday, September 18th.
Okay.
So it must have been, but I remember you were walking there by that deer and did the same thing. Like you wanted to climb on top of this carcass. Interesting. So your earliest memory is you and your sister Dallas on the back of that deer when you were about 3. But it seems to me, just as a father paying attention year after year in those shared moments with you, my hunts or your hunts, you've just always had this infatuation with the field dressing and the breaking it down to consumable meat portions, and whether it's quartering it in the field or bringing it home. But even, do you recall the one hanging in the garage where you were like,
just skinning it and getting it all ready to go? Yeah.
Yeah. What about that is so fascinating for you? Is it just the anatomy of it and
I
how
love
it all
the anatomy and how it's all a little different, but still pretty much the same as we are. And I don't know, you just get to break it down piece by piece. It probably makes me sound a little crazy, but I think it's awesome.
I don't think it's crazy. I think it's I'm glad, especially, if anybody's seen you, you're very dainty. You're always very, I don't know, you're beautiful. So to think of you just getting elbow deep in blood and guts is, I mean, unless someone knows that you've always been that way, they would never probably put that on you. I'm sure when you were at school, going to school in Utah, people were like, "You hunt?"
Yeah.
Did you ever get that?
Yes. So one time this kid, I have a bug out bag in my back of my car, of course. And this one kid cut himself. And I went to hair school, so scissors all the way. But yes, I was like, well, I have something that can take care of that. I go out to my car, bring in this huge backpack that's all camo. And everybody's like, what is going on? You, out of all people, have that in their car? It's like, yeah, you always got to be prepared.
Yeah, very cool. On that note, people were probably then interested to know that you pursue the recreational sport of hunting. It's something that you look forward to every year. You harvest or kill your own animal and you eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably maybe sets people back that don't really know you, but are just getting to know you maybe, that you do that.
Yeah, probably a little bit of a shock to them.
Yeah, I would think so as well. Although you've always done it, and so I'm glad you do.
Yeah.
What is it about hunting that you enjoy so much?
Probably just the experiences with you, most of all. Memories that you can't get rid of, for sure.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
This might be a little bit got a little bump in my throat. So of the big game species, and you're here at the home as we look around. I've never been one to really want to do the taxidermy of my own harvest, although there are a couple. But a lot of these are yours. These 2 6-point elk are yours. The 3 deer upstairs, that deer in the living room,
Antelope.
the 2 antelope. Yeah, those are all yours. But you've always had this thing about, no matter what it was, like, Dad, we're mounting this. And I, always wanted to just encourage that because it kept you excited about it. But of all these species, like, which one, and maybe not species specific, but which of these hunts stands out the most for you?
Definitely my deer, for
4-point?
sure. The 4-point deer. Yes, it was a crazy experience towards the end, but it was an amazing experience with you. Definitely the best hunt we've been on.
Yeah, let's break that down. What made it so amazing?
So amazing. The stock that we put on the deer was amazing. He was on the other side of the hill, and we crawled as close as we could get to take the shot before he took off. And once he was down, there was other people coming down the hill after the deer that I shot, his buddy. He was a little 2-point, and those people were just crazy. They shot the front 2 legs off the deer right over my head, and
Yeah, like the cavalry, huh?
yeah, it was
that was
crazy.
Yeah, that's where it kind of turned, huh?
Yeah.
And that happens in the field, especially if you're in an area where there are other hunters, being mindful of where other hunters are, but knowing that you had closed that gap and had taken that animal, and certainly they had to have some field awareness to know that you had just done that, and then to see one of the other bucks that was running with that herd that had gone a different direction, and they started to open fire on that. Not something that we were very pleased with.
No.
I mean, it certainly wasn't how we hunt,
Yeah.
but, to each their own. It really became an issue of safety.
Yeah.
But prior to that, you're absolutely right.
Yes, the stock was awesome.
That was amazing.
Yes.
And I do remember us belly crawling.
Yes, I was going to say we belly crawled for quite some ways.
And you actually talked to the hen.
I said, you stay here.
You stopped me.
You were being too loud.
Yeah. And so from that point forward, I had to watch you continue to close that gap, which probably was another 60 yards, I'm guessing. And at that point, I'm just an observer. I couldn't be there to help get your backpack as a rest or anything. I mean, it was it was me watching you, and when you pulled the trigger, I mean, that deer dropped right on top. I mean, perfect shot, dropped right on top of itself like a bag of potatoes.
Yeah.
Didn't even know what had happened. The other deer that were there feeding with that buck, they didn't even like immediately take off. They kind of looked around like,
what just happened?
hey, where'd our buddy go? Yeah. Same experience happened with, you got a beautiful antelope a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Very lucky to draw that tag, as you have been the lucky one in the home for sure. On that one antelope, your Boone and Crockett antelope, your big antelope, I know that same situation. I was quite a ways away, glassing what was about to go down. And I started to wonder, like, what are you waiting for? When it was broadside and backdrop was perfect, I mean, it was just like, but I know you put a great amount of time, and we have had many that have walked away because it just wasn't the right situation. But the position and the presentation of that critter for you to make that clean shot so that you don't have to have those follow-up shots for the kill, that's a priority for you.
Yeah.
As it should be. And I've always been very proud that until you are most comfortable, you're not ready to discharge that weapon.
Yeah. Last thing I want to do is just injure the animal, for sure.
Yeah, and we've had that happen.
Yeah.
And that
Happens to everybody.
and that wasn't enjoyable.
No, definitely not.
I remember the one deer when we got up on the deer, and it had ran 80, almost 100 yards, and was wounded. I remember that experience for you, and you asking me, and you were 12. That was your first deer. Dad, can you dispatch it? And I had told you I can't. That you got to finish this through. And I worried at that moment, like, is this, especially you had harvested an antelope that year, your first year, you were very lucky. You've always been very lucky. You've always had that. But I didn't want that to ever happen again. And so we have always put a lot of time in to make sure that we won't have this experience again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. On that note, of all the big game animals that either I or you, what's your favorite wild game to eat? I mean, you love the meat.
Oh, I'm definitely a meat eater for sure. And I love whitetail. Haven't shot it personally, but best meat I think I've ever had.
That is good meat.
Yeah. It's sweet. It's not gamey. You can make anything with it, and it's so good.
And the one meat that we have always really kind of relished in having, some people, it has always been mind-boggling to me because they're like, what? Oh, I just make jerky. And I've even had people say they use it for making dog food, but we love pronghorn.
Yeah.
Street tacos with antelope.
Mm-hmm.
Does it get any better?
No. So good.
Yeah.
Pronghorn steaks, all the way.
How important of that part of the hunt is the hunt for you to have the meat? Especially now as a young married couple, you and your husband Jackson, how important is being able to bring that meat home and have that as a staple to your diet?
Yeah, for sure. I would say that it's extremely important for us, for sure. Saves us a lot of money throughout the year instead of buying beef. And I would say that it's healthier. And I wouldn't feel comfortable hunting without using everything from the animal, for sure.
Making sure that it's all being used. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hence why Dad has spent a year's worth of college tuition over your course of your hunting career, immortalizing these mounts. It's funny that you have always had just a strong desire to, nope, we got to mount that, Dad. Okay, we should. And I've always said, if you want to do that, then I'm going to make sure that we figure out how to do that so that you'll continue to want to do that. So, dream hunt, a hunt that you've never been on that someday would be a bucket list that you would like to check?
Yeah, I definitely would love to hunt boars. That would be so cool.
Just wild boar, like out of a helicopter with like a belt-fed 308 or what?
Yes, it'd be so cool. Shoot them out of a helicopter? Yeah.
Yeah,
that would be so fun.
Yeah, I have seen, well, we've watched several videos of folks that, offer those type of opportunities in Texas, and that would be an experience, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Would you still want to eat it?
I would try it, for sure.
Is there any game animal out there that you would not want to try if you harvested something?
I don't think so. I mean, I've tried some pretty weird things. I've had beaver tacos, and that's a little out there.
Yeah, we've actually come to like eating beaver.
Yeah, it's good.
course, they're at our home, the pond that we have, they attract the beavers every year, but they can be very damaging.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that one year we had Chris Beard, the game warden for this area, come up to kind of look and document what the damage was. 73 aspen trees in a weekend.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's crazy.
they certainly can take their toll on the property. But same thing. Once it was trapped, we wanted to make sure that we could be good stewards of the taking of that life. And, we skinned it and had the pelt tanned and bleached the skull. And then, we ate the meat. I had looked at a lot of the information from the Lewis and Clark journals when the Corps of Discovery was making their efforts out west, and beaver was a delicacy. They ran into a significant amount of beavers at that time in this part of the country, and it was something that they prized in eating, and we thought, well, let's eat this thing. I don't know that I have ever had the interest in eating a muskrat. That seems a little too rodenty, but
I would say probably a squirrel, too. I'd probably have a hard time eating a squirrel.
Now I have had squirrel, and squirrel can actually be delicious. Now, the squirrels here, quite smaller than the squirrels like when I was in the Army, Southeast, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina country. Those squirrels are like man squirrels compared to our squirrels.
Okay.
But there's a lot more meat, but squirrel was good. I wouldn't hesitate to eat squirrel.
Is it like chicken?
Everything's like chicken if it's not, right?
Yeah.
I would say that the thing that I am always mindful of on something like that is looking at what its diet is. And I've never had mountain lion, but I've heard folks that have had, backstraps of mountain lion. Chris Steffen was just telling us in our last Campfire Chat that it's very similar to pork. It's the other white meat, he called it as well. That if you look at what it eats compared to a beaver that has willows and aspens, very woody vegetation, it's just a very good diet. So what they eat is certainly going to, have a reflection in what you're then eating as you're eating it. And so I've just always tried to be mindful of its dietary intake. And if it's something that I thought, well, I would eat that, yeah, then I'll eat you.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you now, as a 22-year-old young woman, what do you know now that you didn't know when you started hunting that you have gained an appreciation for, or have just learned to have more interest in this particular aspect of the hunt or hunting? What is it that just you really cherish?
So recently, being with my husband, he is a waterfowl hunter, and I have never experienced that before. Being from Wyoming, we don't have much of that around here that I know of, at least.
There is. We just wasn't our bag, right?
Okay.
Although I would love to. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I've only gone out just a handful of times, but it's definitely something that I want to get into. Totally opposite ends of what we do out here. Being in the water, where you're in waders and you're halfway up in water, just waiting for birds to fly over so you can get them. It's totally something different.
So on that note, because I haven't had a lot of exposure to that as well, and didn't obviously expose you to that. The duck calling and the decoys and the setup and the still being out there before sunlight. I mean, a lot of those preparational things, is that very intriguing? Is it like what really kind of sets the table for when you do have success, that it was like, oh, this process is pretty cool?
Yeah, for sure. So if we, say we get up early in the morning and we make it out there before the sun's up and we have our decoys out in the water and we're set up, ready to go, the chances of us getting more ducks throughout the day are extremely high because we're not out in the daylight, just putting out our birds where they can see us as they're flying over. So yeah, that plays a big role in the harvesting of the animals for sure.
And what about eating duck? I mean, I've had duck before, not a duck that I've harvested, but I've had duck and I enjoy it. I'm a dark meat guy anyways.
Yeah, me too. I love duck.
Do you?
I like the dark meat of the turkey, so the duck is just all of that, and I love it. It's great.
Oh, that's cool. And then if you get to the point where you take that to the next level and now you have a good trained dog that is an assistant to that hunt, I mean, it's very cool to see you and Jackson taking that on, and it's been probably a little challenging growing up in Wyoming, knowing you could get a tag every year, you could come home to hunt. Now as a non-resident, now 2 years, we've run into this problem where you weren't able to draw a license.
Yeah.
It is quite significantly different as a non-resident to this great state, and your, annual hunting opportunities that have just become something of a way of life. So you got to kind of figure out other ways to get in the field, and you've done that. So yeah, I was very glad to see that you're taking that up there. But all right, one piece of gear as we close that is just very important to you for your hunt. I mean, I know you like the Kuiu gear and you all of that, because that is you.
Yeah.
And you do that well. But if there's one piece of gear that you're just like, this I have like an intimate relationship with this piece of gear because it's that important, what would that be?
Yeah, definitely my binoculars, for sure.
Yeah.
I am a glasser all the way. I love to glass as far as I can see, and usually that's when I see what we're going after, is looking that far away, and then we make the stalk all the way there. And definitely
you in my mind have taken that skill set of having the patience to glass, knowing you could be looking at a landscape for a long period of time with what might be considered, nothing is here, why are we wasting time? You dig in, you're ready to sit it out and know that something will be that.
Yeah,
that's pretty admirable, actually.
Yeah. Well,
it has been great just to talk about hunting with you, because it's something that is very near and dear for both of us, and to share those experiences together, it's absolutely the biggest love for me of hunting at this stage of life, to share in those opportunities with you. I'm so glad you're a hunter.
Well, thanks for making me a hunter. I'm definitely glad to be one.
Yeah. I love you.
I love you. Thanks for having me on here.
All right. Campfire Chat, talking with my daughter MJ on her love of hunting and what makes it so exciting for her. Thanks for tuning in. Campfire Chat, part of Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation production. If you don't want to miss out on future episodes that are debuting and launching every Tuesday, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and you'll automatically be notified of the newest and latest content. Thank you again. Until then, happy trails.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a muley fanatic.